Hi, here I am once again with another interesting literature lesson. So, how are you today? Yes, hope you are safe at home and you all are welcome to Guru Gedar. Can you remember the task I gave you last time? Yes, you had to go through all the chapters we did. That is from chapter 1 to 70. Hope you did well. Let's see. And today also, at the end of the lesson, I am going to give you an assignment. An assignment? Are you excited? Don't worry. It's not a difficult task. Let's go to the lesson. Be attentive because you have to do an assignment. The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. Today we will do lesson 3. As usual, you can see the prince as well as the pauper. Recapitulation. We did chapter analysis in the last lesson, that is from chapter 1 to 10. So I think you can remember what we discussed there. We discussed how Tom Canty and the prince met at the castle and they exchanged their clothes. Finally, they had to adapt to different types of lives. Prince Edward had to live as a commoner and he had to undergo lots of troubles outside the palace. And you can remember Tom Canty as the prince. He had to get adapted to a new life at the castle or palace. There also he had to go through lots of troubles. He met lots of troubles there. Why? You know, he led a life of a pauper earlier, but now he has to get adapted to the life of the palace. So both boys face challenges, especially the prince had to face lots of adventures. On the other hand, you can notice Mark Twain deals with some themes. From the beginning, he dealt with the class difference between the rich and poor. So the rich class was represented by the prince and the castle. The poor class was represented by Tom Canty and Awful Court. Then he dealt with the motive of madness. I think you can remember. Courtiers in the palace thought that the prince is mad. On the other hand, family members of Tom Canty thought that Tom Canty is mad. Again, you can remember the mad hermit, dangerous madness. So, we'll continue the lesson. Let's go to chapter 11. Note the magnificence of the royal barge procession, the rich clothing and the luxurious pillows on which Tom and his companions recline while they view the pageantry. All of this provides an effective contrast with the conditions that the real prince experienced in chapter 10. The pageantry of royalty is a constant preoccupation of Twain's. He glories in describing its magnificence, but at the same time, he mocks this great show of ceremony in several ways later in the novel. Now look at the picture. Here you can see the royal barge procession. Tom Canty as the prince sits in the middle and nearby you find Lady Elizabeth. And in the second picture, yes, you can see a person comes and announces the procession. The motif of the loving cup also appears in chapter 11, when Tom and Elizabeth drink from one at royal feast. Drink from one at the royal feast. Motif of loving cup is contrasted in two situations. I think you can remember the previous one. Yes, it was John Canty drinks from the loving cup because of the insistence of the waterman, and his mood is angry. So, this event is contrasted with the next event. What is the next event? Tom and Elizabeth drink from the loving cup. Both Tom and Elizabeth are willing to drink from the loving cup, and the mood here is celebratory. They enjoy it. But John Canty was angry and he was forced to drink from the loving cup. When John Canty drinks from the loving cup, the prince escapes. Again, we can remember the scene. Go to the video clip and notice his mood.
You, are you boatman? I would cross the river.
We're not join us in a toast, Fred.
I've no time for that. Are you free or not?
Hold on. There's no rush so great, but you have time to drink the prince's health.
The prince? What prince?
What prince do you think? The Prince of Wales. He who will die in yonder building this very night. Go bless him! Will you not bless him too, sir?
I bless no prince nor no king neither. Now get out of my way. I have business of my own.
Aye, sir, you shall not pass, whatever your business, till you have drunk the prince's health and drunk it deep. Give him the cup and make the sour knave drink, or we will feed him to the fishes.
Well.
And you can see how these watermen enjoyed the situation. This ceremony is followed by still further pageantry and by festive dancing by the court nobles. So, in the picture you can see how the courtiers enjoy the ceremony. It is somewhat ironic that in the midst of this celebration, wishing the health and well-being of the Prince of Wales. Why? You know the real situation of the prince. The real Prince of Wales is outside the gates demanding entrance, and as a result is very nearly beaten for his seeming foolishness and arrogance. It is also ironic that the news of the king's death is announced in the midst of all this festive celebration. So, you can see in the picture the last moment of the king Henry VIII. He is dying. So, in the next video clip, you can see how the death of the king is announced.
There will be no procession tonight, nor Guildhall dinner neither.
No dinner, sir? With 100 of the city's finest waiting in attendance?
What is your meaning, Lord Harford?
His Majesty King Henry VIII is dead.
What?
It's true. The king is dead.
Then long live His Majesty King Edward VI. God save the
God
king!
save the king!
Yes, notice the mood of the prince or Tom Canty. And did you notice Lady Elizabeth at once understood what the news is? It is king's death. As soon as Tom Canty learns that the king is dead, he wonders whether it is true that if he gives a command, it will be obeyed. Assured that his word is needed law, his first decree is that the Duke of Norfolk shall not die. So, in the next video clip, you can see how he gives the first command. The Duke of Norfolk shall not die.
Blessed be England to have a just and merciful king. I have one more piece of business.
Beware of pity, my liege. It can do the devil's work and stay the acts of justice.
What is your wish, my lord? One I hope that will bring you joy. Lord Harford, go at once to the Tower and release the Duke of Norfolk. Thanks be to God.
Your Majesty, Norfolk was condemned by the late king, your father. Surely to honor King Henry's memory...
My lord, Norfolk will live. My father's memory will be more honored by his reprieve than by his death.
Your Majesty, listen. The crowd calls blessings on your head.
Come, sire. Let me show them their wise king, and I will cheer with them for what you've done this day.
I think you were able to hear the cheering sound of the crowd. Thus, the Pauper, acting as the new King of England, performs the first in a series of humanitarian acts and establishes a reign of decency and mercy and justice. A great cheer greets the end of the reign of blood. You know, King Henry VIII killed approximately 60,000 people and imprisoned 70,000 more for religious reasons. So you can understand how cruel he is. Chapter 11 also introduces Miles Hendon, a good example of the best of English common sense and common nobility. Even though his clothing has hidden his true nature, you can understand he is also wearing rags, but he has noble qualities. Hendon is immediately attracted to the Prince of Wales, not because he is a prince, but because Hendon is able to see something beyond Pauper's clothes. He was wise. These are young boy's noble qualities. Throughout the rest of the novel, Miles Hendon never really believes that the lad is the true prince, but he seeks ways to help the lad recover from his delusions, and he remains a loyal friend to him. Miles Hendon thinks the boy is mad or he has some kind of sickness. So you can see the event that the prince encounters Miles Hendon. Let's go to the video clip.
Scum! Put me down!
Smart will be all yours, I think, if you take one more step.
Lads, just a bit of fun. Come on.
Thank you, sir. Truly. You came when I had need of you.
Then I am honored. Miles Hendon, at your service. Just returned from fighting in the Netherlands, and glad to have been of help.
I did not speak ill of the prince.
Of course not.
Why should I? I am the prince.
Ah.
Yeah. Here from the beginning, Miles Hendon was able to see some noble qualities of the prince, his decency, good speech, but he says he is the prince. Again, notice the mood of Miles Hendon. There's a mock in his facial expression, but he doesn't show it to the prince. He pretends the prince that he believes his words. Chapter 12 to 13. In chapter 12, when the Prince of Wales hears the cry, "Long live Edward VI," he is immediately filled with immense grief for the death of his father. He understood his father has passed away. At the same time, He is thrilled with immense pride at now being King of England, even though he is treated as a mere pauper. Edward's view of his father as a kind and loving person contrasts with the views of others in the story. Look at the picture. Example, Henry VIII had inspired great fear in the Lord Chancellor in chapter 8, and he has been responsible for the deaths and imprisonment of tens of thousands of English citizens. In this section of the novel, Twain interrupts the narrative flow of the novel in order to give a historical description of the famous London Bridge, so that he can create a sense of historical accuracy for his novel. Then he resumes his story, and we learn that while on the bridge, Hendon and Edward encounter John Canty again. Hendon loses the prince and then regains him. So, Miles Hendon's admiration for the boy increases as a result of the courage which Edward shows when he confronts the threats and curses which John Canty hurls at him. In this particular scene and throughout the novel, Miles Hendon's response to the prince is more like the royal court's response. It is contrasted from the rebels' response to the prince. So, you can see in the picture how Miles Hendon removes the shoes of the prince. Prince commands him to remove the shoes. Yes. So, in the next video clip, you can see, yes, what? The rebels' response to the king, that is contrasted from the treatment of the Miles Hendon towards the prince.
For pity's sake.
I'm not Tom.
Who are you then?
Well, don't you know? He's the King of England, aren't you, Tom lad?
I am.
King of England, are you indeed? Looney, the first king of the moon calves, more like. Come on, let's crown him!
You can observe this gang of thieves. Yes, they hold a mock coronation and humiliate this prince. Hendon seems genuinely concerned for the boy's well-being, and he is determined to protect him and do everything necessary to help the boy be cured of his madness. Thus, Hendon demonstrates us his true nobility of spirit. But Miles Hendon is unable to accept in the prince's tale of his past adventures. This, of course, contrasts with the prince's ready and swift acceptance of Hendon's adventures and family difficulties. So, you can notice Miles Hendon does not believe what the prince says, but the prince believes what Miles Hendon tells him. The first one, Miles Hendon is unable to accept in the prince's tale of his past adventures. The prince believes Hendon's story and adventures. The prince's response to Hendon's story also demonstrates his quickness in promising to right all wrongs and his willingness to reward Hendon's service and loyalty. These characteristics that are displayed by the prince are clearly parallel to similar circumstances and characteristics shown by Tom Canty when he pardons the Duke of Norfolk. So, you find a kind of parallelism between the prince and Tom Canty, you find similar characteristics. Only the difference is the dress. Miles Hendon's request to Edward, when he is given the opportunity, is a very practical one. Hendon simply asks for permission to sit in the presence of the king. This favor is granted by the prince. It has become important in the novel's last chapter for Miles to identify his friend who is in the throne. So, in the picture you can see that is the last part of the story. There you find the real prince as the king, and Miles Hendon get the chance to sit in the presence of the king. Chapter 13, it is primarily devoted to re-establishing the next steps of Twain's plot. It establishes that the prince is gone, recaptured by John Canty apparently, and it also establishes Hendon's firm decision to follow the boy and recapture him. One other important feature of this chapter is the irony of Hendon's statement that he makes about the Prince of Wales. Hendon says when the prince was sleeping on his bed, he looks at the prince and says, "Dear heart, he should have been born a king." Shh, don't make any noise. Can you see? The prince is sleeping. He never thinks that the boy asleep on the bed is indeed the true king of England. Let's go to chapter 14. Chapter 14 again focuses on Tom Canty, the pauper who has been suddenly thrust into the role of a prince. As Edward Tudor did while he was awakening in the hovel occupied by the Canty family. Tom awakens and calls for familiar people, especially his sisters. This scene reflects the difference between dreams and reality, a motif that frequently appears in the novel. So, you know, reality is not so pleasant as the dream. So, in the first picture, you can see Tom Canty as the prince in the palace is sleeping and dreaming about his sisters and mother. But on the other hand, the prince, the real prince, is sleeping at Tom Canty's place and dreaming about his sisters, Elizabeth. In all cases, the dreams are wonderful, and the experiences on awakening to reality are depressing and frightening. Once, Tom Canty dreamt of being a prince, but after he experiences the life in the palace as a prince, he dreams of being back with his own family, even though he would have to endure the dismal condition at Awful Court. When Tom is finally awakened to begin the day, the process of dressing takes up a long deal of time. The process is exaggerated really. Undoubtedly, this process was lengthy enough in real life, but Twain has purposely lengthened the process more to satirize all the pomp and circumstances involved in palace. He wants to show the meaninglessness of this process. Unlike the pageantry of the river trip into the city, which allowed the citizens a chance to see their prince and to find some reason to celebrate, the pageantry of dressing is useless and unproductive in Twain's eyes. Once again, the difference between the way the prince is treated as a commoner and the way the pauper is treated as a prince is contrasted. Example, Both are believed to be mad, but the prince is laughed at, scorned, and beaten for the errors he makes in his madness. Tom is given every consideration. Everyone at court is willing to overlook all his mistakes and to help him regain his sanity. As noted before, Tom learns quickly, and it does not take him long to learn to use his madness as a tool so that he can find out the things that he needs to know. So you can notice his intelligence, his wisdom. Example, in his conversation with his whipping boy, Tom decides to use his loss of memory as an aid in gaining information. He says, "'Tis strange how my memory doth want on with me these days. But mind it not, I mend apace. A little clue doth often serve to bring me back again the things and names which had escaped me." So he is asking this Humphrey Marlowe to give a clue to bring back his memory. So in the picture you can see he talks with Humphrey Marlowe. The thought of helping his king regain his memory thrills Humphrey and gives him an added incentive to continue talking with Tom. The institution of the whipping boy too is a historical reference. The doctrine is that the prince, a son of the king, is sacred. Death is the reward for anyone who touches this sacred person. Thus, any punishment due to the prince is meted out to his stand in, the whipping boy. Throughout the novel, the prince threatens many people with death simply for laying a hand on him. Humphrey accepts the beatings that he takes in the prince's stead with some pride. Although the beatings undoubtedly are painful, he is useful to his prince. More important, these beatings are the means by which he supports himself and his two sisters. Can you remember once he says, "My back is my bread"? Considering the beatings that Tom received in awful court, Humphrey's life cannot be worse than that. Indeed, it is better in many ways than the life Tom is used to. Nevertheless, Tom is horrified by the thought of someone voluntarily taking a beating. Like the prince, Tom is willing to prevent cruelty and to reward service and need. As the prince made Hendon a knight, so Tom makes Humphrey Marlowe hereditary grand whipping boy to the royal house of England. So again we notice the parallelism of these two boys and the similarity of these two boys. Chapter 14 and 15. The theme of Tom's fascination with pageantry mingled with the ritual performance of duty. So it is recorded like this: "The splendors of the scene delighted his eye and fired his imagination at first, but the audience was long and dreary, and so were most of the addresses. Wherefore, what began as a pleasure grew into the weariness and homesickness by and by." So, at the very beginning, although the situation became very enjoyable to him, later it became boring for him. Nevertheless, as Tom learns more and more of what he is expected to do and say, he becomes more comfortable in this new role. You know, he learns the things very fast. Tom's new life is far more pleasant than the prince's new life. So we find contrasted roles of Tom and Prince Edward. If we take Tom, you see, he moves easily into his new role of being a prince. He has far more incentive to adapt to the new role. On the other hand, Prince Edward resists any suggestion of being a pauper. He has far more incentive to try and fight his way back to his rightful position. Tom's quick wit and native intelligence, as well as his humanity and decency, are clearly in evidence in his chapter. Especially, he inquires about the nature of the mob and makes an order to bring the prisoners before him. Tom responds to the innate goodness of the prisoners and is offended by the harsh injustice of the country's law. Consequently, Tom is creating a superb reputation for himself as the King of England. The people who have heard rumors that the king is mad begin to wonder. This is what they say: if this be madness, what indeed is sanity? So, in the next video clip, you can see Tom Canty's judgments as the prince.
Now you, madam, why are you condemned?
They say I am a witch, Your Majesty. That I raised a storm that laid waste the land for many miles around, and that my daughter shares my powers. My lord, I do not beg for mercy for myself. My time has come, I know that. But would you not spare my child? She is as innocent as the dawn, I swear it.
And how did you raise this storm?
They say I wove the spell by taking off my stockings.
By taking off your stockings? Take off your stocking now and raise another storm.
My lord, take care.
If you can raise a storm, even a tiny one, the girl will live.
This is blasphemy. But, sire, I cannot.
Very well, a clap of thunder then. That's all. One clap and the child goes free.
I cannot. I have not the power. I cannot. Oh, spare my child, I beg you. Hang me, and I will bless you if you will only spare my child.
Come. Any mother who was able to save her child by raising a storm would sink England in thunder to do so. This woman does not because she cannot. She has no powers. She is innocent. You are free, woman, both of you. Go in peace.
Here you can see the wisdom of the prince, or Tom Canty. His judgments are rational. Chapter 16. Tom's success in dispensing law and dealing with prisoners and diplomats gains enough confidence in his own judgments. He feels that he can now go to the state dinner with much more assurance and ease. The chapter also provides another history lesson in its description of the pageantry of the state dinner. Twain was obviously well read in the history of this period, and his knowledge is quite apparent in the abundant descriptions of historical details. Chapter 17 This large middle portion of the novel largely focuses on Twain's social criticism of monarchy, in which the common man is at the mercy of dictatorial authority. In these chapters, the prince experiences the life of the lowest stratum of English society as he tries to free himself from John Canty. He is fend for himself and makes his way through the English countryside, which is filled with people who are hostile to anyone whom they do not know. They don't welcome strangers. While he is a part of the troop of vagabonds, and while he is alone, trying to fend for himself, the prince hears many tales of the cruelty of English laws and of many types of injustices throughout the land. These injustices he hears about and witnesses continue and will culminate and receive their greatest impact when Edward finds himself and Miles Hendon in prison in chapter 27. Throughout this section, there is also an emphasis by Twain on disguise. This theme was introduced at the beginning of the novel, when the prince and the pauper exchange their clothes. So that is the first disguise. But there are many other disguises throughout the novel. Notice them. Now, however, Twain focuses on the vagabonds who use disguises in order to dupe people who have more money than they have, and then, after robbing them, successfully escape from the clutches of the law. Example, John Canty is shown in this section in his disguise as a lame ruffian, beggar. Later in the chapter, a blind man casts off the patches from his excellent eyes, and in addition, a man with a peg leg unstraps his real leg and is revealed to be as fit as the rest of the troop. Now in the picture you can see the vagabonds. Yes, and again you find the mock coronation. So there are two types of disguises if you consider the role of the prince. Yes, Fu the first, king of the moon calves. Finally, the prince is mockingly dressed as Fu the first, king of the moon calves. The prince experiences two types of disguise. The first one is disguising as a pauper. The second one is mockingly disguised as make-believe king, Fu the first. Returning to Twain's main emphasis in this section, note particularly that when the prince is introduced to the dregs of his country's society for the first time, he sees the savage effects that his father's laws have had on ordinary citizens. Many in the vagabond band tell tales of harassment done by law. Example, Mr. Yokel's story. Once he was a prosperous farmer, but suddenly, because he was hungry and tried to feed himself and his family, he was hunted down by the law. His wife and children are now dead. His ears are chopped off, and he was sold as a slave, all because it is a crime to be hungry in England. The prince is shocked by this recital and burst out with the proclamation that this day the end of that law is come. This proclamation shows the prince's indignation and determination to ease the suffering of his people and abolish English injustice. But at the moment, his attempts earn him only mockery. His anger and his disappointment at being mocked, however, suggest that he has not yet fully learned the effect of English law on the people in this stratum of society. Now we have reached the end of the lesson. So I think you have enjoyed the lesson. And don't forget the assignment. You have to go through all the chapters, I mean from chapter 1 to 17. Read the chapters and you have to write a chapter summary for each chapter. Remember, it is a summary, not a lengthy description. So we'll meet again in the next lesson. Goodbye.